Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Buntain-Howell. I'm the director of SciArt Initiative, and I'm so thrilled that you have joined us for today's lunch break with Arthur I. Miller. Arthur and I have known each other for a while now. He actually was at our inaugural opening party way back when, and I've been a fan of his ever since. So it's really great to have him on today. Today we are talking about his book, The Artist in the Machine. I will tell you a little bit about him and about the book. So as you know, Arthur I. Miller is Emeritus Professor of History and Philosophy of Science at the University College London. He is the author of Colliding Worlds, How Cutting-Edge Science is Redefining Contemporary Art, and other books including Einstein, Picasso, Space, Time, and the Beauty That Causes Havoc. To talk a little bit about this beautiful book here, I'm going to read for you the inside cover jacket. Today's computers are composing music that sounds more Bach than Bach, turning photographs into paintings in the style of Van Gogh's Starry Night, and even writing screenplays. But are computers truly creative, or are they merely tools to be used by musicians, artists, and writers? In this book, Arthur I. Miller takes us on a tour of creativity in the age of machines. Miller, an authority on creativity, identifies the key factors essential to the creative process, from the need for introspection to the ability to discover the key problem. He offers in-depth interviews with people on the cutting edge of artificial intelligence, encountering computers that mimic the brain and machines that have defeated champions in chess, Jeopardy, and Go. In the central part of the book, Miller explores the riches of computer-created art, introducing us to artists and computer scientists who have, among much else, unleashed an artificial neural network to create a nightmarish, multi-eyed dog cat, taught AI to imagine, developed a robot that paints, created algorithms for poetry, and produced the world's first computer-composed musical, Beyond the Fence, staged by Android Lloyd Webber with friends. But Miller writes, in order to be truly creative, machines will need to step into the world. He probes the nature of consciousness and speaks with researchers trying to develop emotions and consciousness in computers. Miller argues that computers can already be as creative as humans and someday will surpass us. But this is not a dystopian account. Miller celebrates the creative possibilities of artificial intelligence in art, music, and literature. So I have here a hard cover copy. The soft cover comes out November 10th, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. Before I hand it over to Arthur, I will remind our audience members that we're going to have a Q&A portion of this event after his talk concludes, and you can submit your questions in the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Okay, Arthur, I'm going to hand it over to you.
I thank you, Julia, for your very generous introduction, and I thank you all for attending, however, virtually. Okay, let me switch into my share screen. Okay, now, knock, knock. Who's there? Alec. Alec who? I like knock, knock jokes. Now, that's rather lame. But I'll bet that not many of you guessed that that joke was created by a machine. It's a start. Creativity has always been a controversial topic, and especially today when it has been extended from humans to machines. And this is what I will discuss this evening by my time. AI and creativity. Creativity in humans and machines. Now, there has already been seen glimpses of creativity in machines, running algorithms like Deep Dream, which creates bizarre and hitherto unimaginable images, AlphaGo that plays championship Go, generative adversarial networks that generate images and assess them too, and creative adversarial networks that create new art styles. Now, more about these exotic creatures later. For now, we can ask, where do we go from here? How can we evolve more creative machines? To do so, we need to understand precisely what we mean by creativity in terms that are applicable to humans as well as to machines. But many people consider machine creativity to be an oxymoron. After all, how can something made up of wires and transistors be as creative as an Einstein, a Picasso, a Shakespeare, a Bach, or a Beethoven. Yet we are merely an amalgam of veins, arteries, nerves, bones, muscles, and cells, yet we manage to be creative. The great question is, what makes us creative? How can new concepts emerge from those already established in the brain? How can a system, be it a human or machine, come up with products that go far beyond what it has to work with? Now, my own theory of creativity has emerged from my studies of highly creative people. And this has led me to suggest that creativity can be defined as the production of new knowledge or artifacts from what already exists. And this is accomplished by problem solving. Now, indicators of how creative is the new knowledge or objects is whether they are surprising, novel, complex, and ambiguous. Now, these judgments are, of course, quite subjective, and so they have to be handled with care. So the end product of creativity is an object or idea that has never existed before, and is achieved. The process by which it is achieved is problem solving. Now, scientists obviously solve problems, but so do artists, musicians, and writers. And the process of problem solving is what sparks their creativity. So no problem, no creativity. So how will problem solve? What is the process? Well, in 1908, the French mathematician, scientist, philosopher, and keen observer of creativity, Henri Poincaré, suggested a four-stage model for problem solving. First, there is conscious thought, where researchers sit at their desk and consciously work on a problem. They will undoubtedly get stuck, and the experienced researcher will take a break. But this is only a conscious break, because the intense, passionate desire to solve a problem keeps it alive in the unconscious, where it can be turned around in ways that are not possible in consciousness owing to the barriers and inhibitions that exist there. And it is along these lines that hopefully the problem solution or illumination will emerge and then will percolate up into consciousness, into the verification stage, which is an important stage because a problem solution that does not emerge in its golden shining form, rough edges have to be honed off, deductions have to be sought. At this point, we ask, what drives the creative process? What is the dynamics of creativity? What is the sine qua non of creativity? And I call these characteristics of creativity, and among those that have emerged from my studies of highly creative people are inspiration, suffering, introspection, imagination, and the high degree of competitiveness. And we are reminded here of Steve Jobs' audacious theft of a revolutionary computer interface invented at Xerox Corporation. Then there is unpredictability and being out there and having worldly experiences like falling in love. Then there, at a very high level, there's problem discovery and finding connections between apparently disparate concepts. Now, many of you will have noticed that there's an emotive dimension to many of these characteristics of creativity, and we know that the mixture of emotions and unpredictability can be highly flammable and explode a new idea. For example, the Viennese physicist Erwin Schrödinger sought for months to find the equation which would bear his name in quantum physics, and lo and behold, he found it in the course of a passionate, illicit weekend with a power more. Later, I will return to how machines can have human characteristics of creativity and so be creative like us. For now, enough theory, let's look at an actual case of creativity, of human creativity. How Alexander Mordvintsev created the algorithm Deep Dream. This is Mordvintsev and myself at last year's prestigious Lumen Arts Competition exhibition in London, where I served as judge for AI-created art. Deep Dream was the first algorithm that allowed artificial neural networks to create stunning new art. And the creative narrative that I'm about to discuss with you is straight from an interview I did with Mordvintsev for my book, The Artist and the Machine. And I was elated that it mirrored my own theory of creativity. In 2015, Mordvintsev worked as an engineer at Google's offices in Zurich. And the problem that most interested him went right to the heart of AI. That is to say, we know that artificial neural networks work, but we're not sure how. Now, Google gives its employees 1 day a week to work on a Google-related problem other than the one they're tasked with, and Mordvintsev chose that one, the knotty problem of how artificial neural networks work. It was a brave choice for the young man. Inspired by the challenge, he got down to conscious work. And the path along which he persevered was to look into how maybe research into computer vision could shed some light on this knotty problem. So I asked him at this point, so what did you do during the other 6 days a week? Did you just forget about this problem? And he said, no, it was always on my mind. And indeed, the intense, passionate desire to solve a problem keeps it alive in the unconscious. And so it was. A little past midnight on 18 May 2015, Mordvintsev awoke with a start. He thought he heard a noise in his living room. Was there an intruder there? He leapt out of bed. There was no one there. But then he said he suddenly found himself surrounded by dozens of beautiful problems. And one of them crystallized to a point that he could begin programming. And this was the solution to the problem of how artificial neural networks function. And it goes along the following lines. Mordvintsev realized that what one should do is to present to the machine a target image and then stop analysis at partway through at a certain layer of neurons, and then ask the machine, what do you see? And it's for this purpose that he invented or created the algorithm Deep Dream. Then he went into the verification stage where he cleaned up the solution, wrote code, and also wrote a detailed technical report. And he did this all at white heat until 2 a.m. in the morning. Then he presented a JPEG to the code. This JPEG, he used only the part with the adorable cat against a verdant background. And he presented that as a target image, stopped analysis partway through, and then asked the machine, remember it's running Deep Dream, what do you see at this point? And whenever you see, I want more of it. This is what the machine saw. Stunning, surreal. Sometimes this is called the monster beast. It's a cat-like thing with 2 additional eyes on its head, 2 eyes on its haunches, canine attributes distributed over its body, and the verdant background has become a mosaic with spiders crawling on it. What's going on here is that Deep Dream overinterprets an image. So if we look at a cloud, we look at it long enough, we think we see birds in it. We present that image to an artificial neural network machine running Deep Dreams, it sees birds too, weird birds, birds whose bodies are made up of parts of all of the images the machine has been trained on. Now, what Deep Dream allows us to do is to study how a single neuron, a group of neurons, contributes to an emerging image. So in this way, it doesn't completely solve the problem of how neural networks function, but it gives us some insight and some path to work on. So we've looked at human creativity. Now let's turn to machine creativity. Now, like us, computers or machines are problem-oriented and work with the data in their memory. There's no conscious thought because machines presently have no consciousness. Instead, we give them a problem to work on. They mull it over in their unconscious, in introspective thought, and they use all the data that is in their memory. And hopefully, the solution will emerge. Let's look at some of the creative machines I mentioned earlier. AlphaGo is an algorithm that runs on an artificial neural network machine. It was created at DeepMind in London. And in 2016, it trounced the highly regarded Go master Lee Sedol. And at that point, everyone agreed that the venerable 2,500-year-old game of Go had been cracked by a machine. A great moment. Now, AlphaGo learned, that is to say, taught itself how to play Go by studying over 30 million board positions from games played by Go masters. Then it reinforced this knowledge by playing against itself millions of times. AlphaGo made many extraordinary moves, but the one that everyone remembers is move number 37 in the second of the 5-game match. It was a move that you were not supposed to make at that point in a Go game, and indeed had not been made in 2,500 years. So Lee and the AlphaGo team thought the machine had hit a glitch, but they very quickly realized it was a killer move. And indeed, AlphaGo had calculated that the odds of a human being making that move was 1 in 10,000. This move number 37, was more than a glimmer of creativity. Now let's consider using as a target image for an artificial neural network machine running Deep Dream, a JPEG of Van Gogh's Starry Night. Use it as a target image, stop analysis partway through, and then ask the machine, what do you see at that particular layer of neurons? Machine might see this. We don't see that. So AlphaGo, while AlphaGo can imagine things we cannot, Deep Dream sees things we cannot. Now, up until 2014, artificial neural networks were very good at identifying faces and animals, but not so good at generating images. And then generative adversarial networks, or GANs, came on the scene. A generative adversarial network is made up of two networks. One is a generated network that generates images from nothing, that is to say, noise. And the other is a discriminatory network, which assesses whether the images are real or not relative to what are in their database, in its database. So GAN allows a machine, an artificial network, to imagine, to dream. GAN took the world of AI by storm. Let's see what it can do in art. Mario Klingemann is a pioneering AI artist. An AI artist is a new breed of artist. An AI artist is technologist and artist rolled into one. An AI artist creates with code. As Klingemann said to me, human creativity is limited, and I wholeheartedly agreed, the implication being that machine creativity is unlimited. Here are two images from Klingemann's vast repertoire, which he created with GAN, generative adversarial networks. They are surprising, unsettling even, novel, complex, and ambiguous. They check off all the boxes for creativity. Klingemann considers them to be partway between the painterly and the digital. Now, Abd el-Gamal is a computer scientist / art aficionado, for whom art style is everything. He created an algorithm that he calls creative adversarial network, which is a spin-off of generative adversarial network. Having trained his machine on over 80,000 images from Western art over the years 1400 to 2000, in other words, most of the canon of Western art, he said to his machine, create me a new style. And it did. Created a style. Here's a style, and here are images that the machine created using that style. It's surprising, novel, complex, ambiguous, again, checking off all the boxes for creativity. Many people think that these images were created by a human artist, but surprise, surprise, it was created by a machine. And the kicker here is that judges assess the quality of many of these images to be better than the quality of a lot of the work that had been exhibited at the 2016 Art Basel Fair. And I assure you that ruffled a lot of feathers in the art community. I want to say a few words now on a machine collaborating with a human being, and in which machine and human bootstrap each other's creativity. I have in mind here Francois Pachet's Continuator. Pachet is a computer scientist musician who presently directs Spotify's Creative Technical Research Lab in Paris. And Pachet said to me, how do you compose a compelling song? A song that remains in your head and the heads of millions of people. Now, by song, Pachet included also melodies from improvisation. Pachet is keen on jazz. A few years ago, he thought up the problem of how can I improve a musician's creativity in improvisation? The solution was Continuator. Let's see how Continuator works. A musician begins to improvise. His train of notes is fed to Continuator, which parses them into phrases. And these phrases are then fed to a phrase analyzer, which looks for patterns. And it is along these lines that Continuator creates an improvisation in response to the musicians. Improvisation is sometimes considered to be a conversation between a musician and a musical instrument. Here's a conversation between a musician and an AI. Now let's pause before taking the plunge into discussing whether machines can have human characteristics of creativity and so be creative like us. We have seen that even in their current somewhat narrow state, machines have shown glimmers of creativity, and that's a substantial step forward. When we make a substantial step forward and create something that goes way beyond the material we have to work with. We call it creativity. So why not recognize the machine's creativity in the same way? Why the pushback? I think that many people balk at the very notion of machine creativity because they're afraid of it coming to pass. But why should creativity be an attribute reserved only for machines? For example, in all definitions of art that I've seen, they all assert that the final product must have been instigated by a machine, by a human being. But why must there always be a human in the loop? Making that assertion means that while machines can create art, they can never be creative. They can never be creative artists. Game over, don't read any further. But in the age of AI, this argument is wrongheaded, ignoring as it does dazzling research in AI that points to a future in which machines will be creative and will possess emotions, volition, and consciousness. Indeed, today, the field of affective computing is a hot research field which right now focuses on machines recognizing human emotions. Okay, let's now turn to how machines can have human characteristics of creativity and so be creative like us. I'll begin with competitiveness. Now, highly creative work often operates in a distinctly Darwinian environment. One must fight for the acceptance of one's ideas, and great thinkers have been known to steal from their competitors. Can machines share this characteristic? A robotics group at l'École Polytechnique Fédérale in Lausanne writes of some of their research. Sophisticated forms of communication and deceptive signaling can evolve in groups of robots with simple neural networks. In other words, we can evolve robots that can be deceptive, can even lie, forms of emotion. And indeed, even among emotions, even among robots, there is survival of the fittest. A key element of creativity is unpredictability, going beyond logic, which is often happens in the unconscious thought phase. Might it be possible for machines too to be unpredictable? As it happens, machines have unpredictability built into them. We recall move number 37 in AlphaGo. Another example is as follows. Machines are an amalgam of a large number of parts, each of which are designed according to the laws of Newtonian science, with its determinism and causality. But you put all of these parts together, and it is possible for chaotic behavior to emerge, that is to say, unpredictability. This can happen, for example, because numbers are exchanged between different parts of a machine. These numbers have to be rounded off. Rounding off gives a little bit of imprecision, a tiny bit of imprecision, which can snowball into a chaotic event or unpredictability. This is like the butterfly effect, where a tiny butterfly in Brazil can flap its wings and cause massive storms in the Northern Hemisphere. So in humans, emotions plus unpredictability can be explosive and trigger creativity. So can machines have emotions? Actually, competition and unpredictability already involve emotions. So let's look into emotions a bit further. Now, people might argue that machines cannot be truly creative because they are not out there in the world, having emotional experiences, like communing with nature or falling in love. But they can acquire such knowledge vicariously. In the not too distant future, machines will be able to read a language fluently with all its tropes and nuances. And then they will be able to truly read the web and can acquire more knowledge than we can in a lifetime. And so convince themselves and us that they have acquired such experiences that seem to be essential for creativity, like inspiration, love, hate, and anger. And eventually we will wire up machines with complex systems of sensors, regulatory mechanisms, and communication pathways by means of which they will evolve a set of emotions that are duplicates of ours. So this gorgeous lady I met some years ago turned out to be a sex bot. Presently, they have clumsy responses and comic book-like appearances, but I'm sure that that will be taken care of in the future. And indeed, we can imagine that sex bots will undoubtedly transform human relations. But by that time, the notion of what it is to be a human being will also have been dramatically transformed And indeed, perhaps artificial intimacy will be the real intimacy. Presently, a stumbling block in creative machines is that the machine is not aware, in fact, it has no clue that it's made a beautiful move in Go or chess, that has painted a beautiful picture, and certainly robot comedians, as I'm sure you've seen, have no clue at all that they've just cracked a hilarious joke. Machines cannot be considered to be truly creative until they have emotions, awareness, volition, and consciousness, which will also give them the urge to create. So what is consciousness, and will machines ever have it? Now, two key elements essential to consciousness are awareness and self-awareness. Presently, machines have a low-level sense of self-awareness, and that they're certainly aware of the circuitry and of the problem they're working on. Now, consciousness is our essence, our inner being. It is what we are. And so it is crucial for our creativity. And many philosophers argue that consciousness is such a private realm of being that it cannot be investigated using science. But in the age of AI, the problem of consciousness has moved from the philosophical to the scientific. I've struggled for many years over the problem of consciousness and what it is. And I've come to the conclusion that it results from the data processing of incoming information by the 100 billion neurons in our brain. And so consciousness is computable. It's reducible to numbers. And so there's no reason why computers also, or machines also, cannot have consciousness. For details, I refer you to my book. And I want to say a few words on problem discovery, the discovery of the proper problem to work on, and finding connections between disciplines that may seem to have nothing to do with one another. This is research on an extremely high level, a level populated by people of the ilk of Einstein. But I don't want to be construed here that I'm restricting my discussion only to scientists. I'm including also artists, musicians, and writers, all of whom can make breakthroughs and change the course of their disciplines. Can machines work at that level? Can they make such breakthroughs? Astonishingly, they have the potential to do so, because text and equations can be encoded in numbers. And numbers are grist for the mill of artificial neural networks, here shown in all their glory next to Einstein. Now let's look into the far future and consider an artificial neural network jam-packed with all the knowledge that has ever accrued on this planet, and set it to work, say, on the field of physics. And it will look at the field of physics and notice a particular part that is beset with redundancies and inconsistencies, which sometimes results from the wrong problem being considered or the wrong research path being embarked on. So the machine will look at concepts indigenous to that part of physics and concepts that impinge on it from other parts of physics, and then concepts that just maybe tangentially touch it from fields that seem pretty astray, such as art, music, philosophy, history. And lo and behold, one of those concepts makes a difference. It enables the machine to begin to look for the proper research problem, or perhaps the proper path of research. Coming back down into today, there are huge collaborations of scientists working with machines. And I have in mind medical scientists, and the machines I have in mind are machines running, among the other algorithms they run, the algorithm Semantic Scholar, which was created by the Allen Institute. It has the potential to look for correlations between over 200 million scientific papers, and I mean medical scientific papers, and have in mind collaborations of scientists and machines working towards better understanding and dealing with COVID-19. And the hypotheses that they will come up with will be far wider and deeper than the hypotheses that scientists working alone can envision. So, as with Deep Dream, AlphaGo, GAN, and CAN, machines can imagine and see things that we cannot. So today I've begun with human creativity, moved to machine creativity, and talked about collaborations between humans and machines. And all this points to a future in which creative machines will work by themselves. This means that in the perhaps not too distant future, machines will have evolved that have a consciousness, creativity, and emotions that are duplicates of ours. This will be the age of artificial general intelligence. These machines will be as smart as us. And at that point, the line between artificial intelligence, which I always consider to be a terrible oxymoron, and human intelligence will be removed, and there will only be intelligence. Then some years beyond that, machines will evolve, which are much, much, much smarter than us. This will be the age of artificial superintelligence. These machines may well have emotions and consciousness which differ from ours. That shouldn't be unusual because machines have a different physiology from ours. Right now, it's a silicon physiology. Who knows what it will be in the future? We cannot even imagine right now. Just as we cannot even imagine what this consciousness and emotions will, how they will differ from ours. But one thing is for certain, that these machines will have a creativity which will far, far, far surpass ours, because machines have the potential for unlimited creativity. So at this point, we may ask, well, what's our role going to be in all this? Are we going to be household pets, as some silly dystopian scenarios assert? Well, that's a very complex question. What will be our role in the world of artificial superintelligence? Because by that time, the notion of what it is to be a human being will have been dramatically, dramatically, dramatically transformed. Because are we not merging with machines? And this may not be a bad thing, because machines have the potential to look into the future, to see problems and deal with them. And we don't seem to be very good at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arthur. That was amazing. If you want to exit your screen sharing, then we can get to some questions in from the audience.
Great, here I am.
A few of my own. All right, great. The first question is from Joseph, and Joseph asks, what is the role of psychedelics in creativity, especially among the AI artists?
Well, among AI artists, psychedelics certainly does play a role, since a lot of deep dream art looks like psychedelics. In fact, it looks like images that are dreamed by people under the influence of LSD, which also you can go further and say, well, so the cerebral cortex might have something to do with convolution neural networks.
Interesting. So yeah, there's definitely some kind of relationship there, but maybe there's a few kinds of relationships.
And one can say that one is perhaps looking into the machine's subconscious.
Another question in from the chat that I just saw. Where did it go? There it is. From Kenny. Do you have thoughts on Christoph Koch's The Feeling of Life Itself, where he argues that consciousness cannot be computed as it is a functionalist account of the mind, not concerned with the causal properties of the underlying system?
Oh, I totally disagree with that. Actually,
you have clear thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's sure what I'm dealing with is called a computationalist, or maybe functionalist view, if you want to push that, all the ist and isms. In other words, it's a view that says that consciousness is computable, and there's nothing wrong with that, because basically we are nothing but machines. I mean, we are a cosmic accident that along billions of years ago, the sun spit out a certain isotope of carbon, and we're carbon life forms. We could equally well be silicon life forms. On a macroscopic level, we are biological machines in the sense where muscles, bones, cells, and then go one below that to we're chemical machines with a little bit of electricity thrown in, and then all the way down where electrons, protons, neutrons, gluons, the whole zoo of elementary particles, all of which are in principle and in practice often too, describable by the laws of quantum physics, which can be put on a machine, in which case are reducible to numbers.
Yeah, and it will be really interesting to see, where the field of the scientific study of consciousness goes and how that plays into the development of AI as it relates to AI creating artwork. That's certainly something we'll see over the next couple of decades. Because as Kenny kind of pointed out, there is some contention in what the definition of consciousness is, how it should be talked about, how it could be measured, all of this stuff.
Yes, well, how can we measure and stuff like that is still unsettled.
Most definitely, yes.
Yeah, right.
A question in from Hannah. Can AI-generated art be attributed to the algorithm AI alone, or is it credited to the programmer? Follow-up question, what does it mean to value or view the AI independent of its own creators?
Oh, that's it. Well, that's a very good question. Right now, art is being created by an algorithm, but there's a human being in the loop. But you know, there's a story I like to tell that Mozart's father taught Wolfgang the rules of composition, but we don't attribute Mozart's work to his father. Okay, so machines can go beyond their programs, and their machines are already starting to write their programs on a very fundamental level. But there will come a time when they will write their programs. Well, machines will replicate, and so the loop will be closed. It will be the machine on both ends. Right now, it's the human being with a lot of input creativity. I mean, for example, Deep Dream one has a marvelous bit of creativity by Alexander Mordvintsev in writing the algorithm for Deep Dream, and then the machine goes beyond its database. And again, when we go beyond our database, we call it creativity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was wondering myself what the future of like copyright law and attribution will be once we have truly independent AIs creating art, and what kind of advocacy system will be in place for,
Well,
you know,
right now, I
making
mean,
sure that
yes, that is
competition. Yeah.
yeah, cyber law is a contentious field, and people in cyber law, incidentally, still refuse to admit that machines can be creative. But at any rate, with cyber law, yeah, there's a whole hornet's nest in there, and that who does the algorithm belong to, who does the data belong to, and who does the machine belong to, and so on. But we agree that for human artists, the human artist has the copyright. So
Right.
when machines will produce on their own, when they have volition, and then it will be their work of art. And machines right now can have a very basic level of volition and even free will, one might call it, because why not put a webcam on a painting bot, take it outside, have it look around, it sees something, it likes to paint because it's attracted to it from on the basis of what's in its own database and what it has painted in the past, and it paints it. So that's a picture that the machine has created.
And that's not unlike the way a human decides what to paint when
Very
they
much
go
like it. Yeah,
outside.
very much like
Yeah. More questions coming in. Generally speaking, what do you think the next steps of creative AI art is? What's kind of a near future direction? Like, what do you think we'll see in the next 10 years that we're not seeing right now?
What we'll see in the next 10 years, the machines being more autonomous.
And maybe
Machines
being more.
getting started on their own. There's already movement in that direction. There's a computer scientist, Simon Colton, about whom I write a lot about in my book, who has a machine that can read the newspaper. Well, it reads articles that Colton puts into it, and can decide whether it's sad or happy, because there's also an algorithm that can tell the emotive content of words. And then if a person sits in front of the machine might say, I don't feel like painting today, I feel rather sad. Or it will paint a picture of you in a sad state rather than in a happy state, and so on. So there's already movement in that direction. But right now, it's mainly collaborative work, but that will change.
Mm-hmm. Kind of a related question from Edwin, who asks, what is the role of play in the evolution of AI? That is to say, AI that preforms an action without being prompted.
Oh, absolutely. Play is very important. And training robots, for example, robots learn the world teach themselves about the world through touch. And that's a very close to the psychology of Jean Piaget, of how a child develops intelligence. And in that sense, also, robots will eventually have, or first be taught, but then evolve themselves a means of play.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, machines can play, of course. AlphaGo plays. And AlphaGo, right now, AlphaGo has been superseded by AlphaZero, which learns chess and Go just from the rules. And so it has no contact with human beings at all. And so plays a sort of chess that in a way that is strange to a human opponent. And in this way, we see machines already thinking along their own lines that are different from the way that we think. It has an entirely different strategy. It puts a different emphasis on the way chess pieces are important, and so plays in a very distinct and very different way, much different from the way humans play. So actually, we are in a sense already speaking to alien forms of life. I mean, we don't have to go to Mars to find alien forms of life. They're developing right next to us, and the amazing thing is that we are merging with them.
That's right. Question from Dan. How important do you think embodied experience is to creativity and consciousness? Will we need robots moving through our 3D world before consciousness can develop artificially?
Robots, yes, robots and machines will develop consciousness, as I mentioned. But one line is for them to read the web and learn everything that's on the web, and then they will develop through our consciousness is to a large degree develop as we become more and more aware of the world. There are theories of consciousness that are based on awareness and attention. And so, yes, certainly machines and robots will develop. We won't have to program it into them. We'll develop consciousness as they move about the world, as they have worldly experiences. The notion of artificial consciousness, I just don't like. I mean, there's consciousness, and machines will have it too. We are artificial in many ways too.
A kind of related question. What is left out in comparing organisms to machines and our consciousness to that of computers?
Well, there's a lot left out right now, but I mean, they're coming. They are merging. I mean,
maybe increasingly less left out.
Increasingly less as time. It'll be a long time, but as time goes on. Well, actually, AGI, artificial general intelligence, most experts agree that it'll be by the end of this century. It will emerge, and then it's, well, maybe just a hop, skip, and a jump to artificial superintelligence.
Question from me. Do you own any AI generated art? Are you an AI generated art lover?
Yes, I am. As a matter of fact, I do own a picture or two. In fact, a portrait of me drawn by a robot.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Quite good.
Yeah, it's been so interesting to see how the art market responds to
yes, that's a real phenomenon.
Art sales. I can't remember what the figure was, but
$432,000 a work of art went by, which was very basic generative adversarial network. And Mario Klingemann, whom I mentioned in my talk, went berserk over that. I mean, his work far supersedes the work of the art creative that did this. And indeed, the person from Christie's that spotted it didn't know anything about AI art, and it was just, sold a bill of goods essentially.
Right.
Mario unfortunately went for only $50,000, but nevertheless, AI art is on the high end of the art market.
Yeah, it's not too shabby for a debut AI artist.
Absolutely. I mean, it was good publicity for everyone, and for you too.
Yeah. I'm just going through to see if I missed any questions here. We're basically at time as it is. So Arthur, I would like to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing an overview of your book. I can speak from experience. You want to buy this book and actually read the full thing. It is a treasure trove of information. Again, the paperback comes out November 10th, published through MIT Press, but available in many places. So yes, thank you again, Arthur.
Well, thank you for inviting me.